My new book, Awake, Observe, Shape, Transform, is now available on Amazon, along with the 90-day transformation journal. You'll find a link to these things in the episode description. Also, if you'd like to support this work, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers with no locked content, just a way to say I value this. You can also visit the site and check out the growing merch store, shirts, tanks, hats, and learn about one-on-one sessions with me by clicking the About button. And don't forget, the YouTube page has the podcast and binaural beats for meditation, rest, and sleep. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're doing it. Of all of the fringe topics, of all of the pseudo-edgelord discussions on the nature of reality, this one is probably the one I get asked about the most. And it's the one that rolls my eyes the hardest when I hear people talking about it. And that's whether or not we're in a simulation. So I'm going to warn you right now. This is one of those episodes that might mess with your idea of what's real. It's going to stretch the rubber band of your mind a little bit. But if you stay with me, it might just snap you into a new way of seeing your life. So let's take a walk into the Matrix. Let's talk about Maya. Let's talk sacred texts and ancient myths. And yes, we'll even talk about whether this is all just some elaborate hallucination or maybe even a classroom. But more importantly, I'm going to bring you back to you, because even if we are living in a simulation or in the dreaming mind of God, the real question is, what are you going to do with your experience of the truth? So strap on a helmet, get a rope, this one gets steep. Simulation or the divine dream, exploring the Matrix, Maya, and the mystical nature of reality. So let's start with the question at the heart of all of this. Is what you're experiencing real? Well, that depends. So we should start out with some vocabulary words that will be useful during this episode. Words that I've hammered home in the past, but bear repeating, especially if we're going to talk about this whole simulation thing. First, the word objective. Objectivity cannot involve opinions, preferences, or personal tastes. It must be free of those things. So right there, we've already run into an issue, especially for a culture of people that supposedly place such a high value on the objective truth. However, subjectivity, that involves opinions, preferences, and personal taste. Well, right there, this is where this gets very interesting. And I think right here, I'd like to add this. Just because a majority of people believes something doesn't make it objectively true. And just because you're adhering to what the majority believes doesn't mean that you're using objectivity. Remember, objectivity cannot involve preferences, tastes, or opinions, even if they are the opinions, preferences, and tastes of the majority. Now, for something to be real, it must actually exist as a thing or occurring in fact, not imagined and not supposed. And for something to exist, it must have objective reality or being. Now, right back to that pesky word, objectivity. Hopefully you're seeing the issue here when someone asks, is this real? So let's keep going. Now, let's look at the word hallucination. A hallucination is an experience involving the apparent perception of something that's not present. And that something doesn't necessarily need to be an object or a person. It can also be the intention of others, for instance, right? And by the way, the quote-unquote apparent perception, right? That part, perception means the way we regard, understand, and interpret things. And the way we regard, understand, and interpret things is in fact subjective. And well, perception is reality. So clearly, we can see how someone might hallucinate that there is danger that might not objectively be there simply because they are regarding it, understanding it, or interpreting it that way. Meaning that just because you feel as though doesn't make it real, and certainly doesn't mean that now you get to act on your perception. I mean, you can do what you want, right? But I'd consider that ripple analogy, right? The one that I'm always giving you guys. And lastly, the word illusion. An illusion is anything that is or is likely to be wrongly perceived by the senses. There's that subjective word perception again. And by the way, senses isn't, as I've said in the past, mistaking cooking broccoli for a fart. We're talking about your nervous system sensing something, or really your subconscious mind interpreting stimuli as symbols that tell your nervous system to respond in a certain way that then cause the conscious mind to elaborate on the stimuli, thus causing the nervous system to continue to fire in the way that it's firing. Essentially, just because you think it and feel it doesn't mean that it's true. And it certainly doesn't mean that it's objectively true. And though this might sound bleak that, nothing's objectively true or real, it's actually good news because that means you can change your experience of it. So, is this all real? Is it an illusion? Is it a hallucination? And I don't mean, are you hallucinating right now? Though, I mean, maybe. But I mean, is this experience of being you in a body walking through time and space an actual reality? Or is it something like a projection, a dream, a construct, a kind of spiritual VR headset? And you've probably heard this idea before. It pops up all over pop culture, The Matrix, Inception, Westworld, even Rick and Morty. But this isn't a new concept. It is ancient. So let's start where a lot of us in the West might start, and that's with Christianity. Now, Christianity doesn't outright say we're in a simulation. It can't, because that would be a difficult sermon even for the cool pastor with a goatee and tattoos. But it does lean on this idea that the world isn't the real world. In 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes, "We look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Now, I don't know if this is outright biblical proof and another hidden reality behind a veil, but it does touch on the Eastern idea of the unchanging eternal awareness, or our eternal identity, our one true self. You hear phrases like, "this world is not our home," or "we are in the world but not of it." It makes references to being a sojourner, as if this is some sort of realm that we're just passing through. Now, Gnostic Christianity, the early offshoot that the church later labeled as heretical, got even deeper with this. The Gnostics believed that the material world was created by a lesser being, the demiurge, and that the true divine reality was hidden behind this illusion. This is the Kabbalistic view of things that you'll read about in the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. It's a view that this is some sort of mistake, or that the reality is a problem that we need to escape. And I take issue with that. I mean, look, I'll say it up front. The point of the vocabulary at the start of this episode was meant to inform you that you really only have one option, and that is to work with your perception of things, right? You're not going to change the functioning of the world. It is always going to do what it does. And sure, let's say you landed on Earth through no fault of your own, and that it's a problem that you got to escape or be liberated from. Well, how is walking around with that mindset going to benefit you? Wouldn't it be more beneficial to see it as a classroom, or some kind of an adventure, or even as the divine play of God, or on a more radical end of things, an adventure that you may have asked for? And yes, I realize the problems with saying that, but just think about it. Which is going to give you a better experience long term even? It's a punishment? It's a problem? Or it's a class, an adventure? So yeah, according to the Bible, we have some, simulation adjacent ideas, or at the very least, We are slowly but surely making our way home as human beings. Now, in Islam, particularly in Sufi mysticism, the fun one, we see something similar. Ibn Arabi, a Sufi philosopher from the 12th century, spoke of the world as a dream, God's dream. He said that existence itself is the result of God's imagination. He even used the word khalik, hope I'm pronouncing that right, creation, to describe this projection of divine thought. There's also the idea in the Quran that this world is a test, temporary, like that it's like a temporary station, right? A veil. That what's here is not the final or full reality. Again, we're back to simulation adjacent ideas. And this one from Ibn Arabi that really mimics a lot of the Hindu ideas. And I know, or at least in my understanding, Sufism and Hinduism kind of run parallel in a lot of ways. Then, over in Judaism, especially the Kabbalistic teachings, we have this idea of the world being a series of emanations, sephirot, radiating from the unknowable God, Ein Sof, which means unending or infinite. So you could say that the world is emanating from an infinite source that is unknowable by the human mind, which it probably is. And as a side note, right, if you ever want to see what centralized spirituality looks like as opposed to decentralized spirituality, look no further than Judaism. And I say that because traditionally the Zohar is not advised to be read until the age of 40. Once the student or follower had mastered the Talmud and Torah and has managed to live a morally upright life and studied under a qualified teacher. Now, you have to understand that this isn't just arbitrary, okay? Because the Zohar was seen as spiritually volatile. It's like kind of like this mystical explosive, and was said that without proper grounding, one could misunderstand its teachings and lose their way mentally or spiritually. And this reminds me of the legend started by L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. He claimed that after having gone through a dental procedure, he was in some sort of altered state of consciousness, that he sat down and apparently wrote a book called Excalibur that enunciated the truth of life so succinct that when he sent it to publishers, they either rejected it furiously or they went completely insane and had mental breakdowns because, it was just so right on. Honestly, I'm just annoyed with this idea of keeping text from people because they'll misunderstand it. And it seems to happen a lot in Judaism. I quite like the Einstein quote that says, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, then you don't understand it yourself. Or paraphrasing, something like that. Anyway, I understand, right? The last thing you'd want, would be like a group of religious followers that misunderstand the nuances and allegorical meaning of a text to the point where they become either closed off from society or unable to assimilate to whatever place they're shuffled off to or chose to go. Or they become so violent because they're confused about what the verse actually meant. You don't want that, because that would be horrible. Have we tested the water over there? For lead or mercury or something, because I feel like we might want to at least take a look at it, Also, since I'm already being a bit of a rabble rouser here, when I worked in the addiction treatment space, I had a lot of rabbis for clients, and let's just say that the part about leading a moral, upstanding life before one dives into the Zohar might have been lost on a few people. As Queen Gertrude in Hamlet says, "Methinks thou dost protest too much," right? I do not believe in gatekeepers. And I believe that these things should always be decentralized. And for more on that, try episode 198, Decentralized Spirituality, Why You Don't Need a Middleman to Find God. Anyway, so the Kabbalists would say that the physical world is just the densest layer of multidimensional spiritual reality. Now, plug your ears if you're under 40, living an immoral life, and don't have a full grasp on the Talmud or the Torah. But the Zohar speaks of the physical realm being kind of a garment for truth, capital T, right? Like a costume covering something more real. Now, that sounds a lot like spiritual coding, like programming, a kind of divine rendering engine for a video game or something. In fact, you could say that a video game is an interesting analogy for the soul and the body and life itself. The avatar on the screen, the character is the human incarnation, and the person holding the controller is the soul, and the platform being used could be God, could be source itself. The avatar has to move through the game, completing tasks and learning new skills along the way, and acquiring things that could be useful later, and ultimately has a path, a purpose, and everything in the game is there ultimately to serve that path that the character is on. I find that interesting. Now, if you want to go full Matrix, let's talk Hinduism. In Vedanta, they talk about Maya. It's a Sanskrit word that literally means illusion or that which is not. Maya is the cosmic illusion that makes the one, capital O, appear as many. It's what keeps us thinking that we are separate bodies, individual selves, having separate experiences. In other words, the reality testing function of the human ego is Maya, right? The ego is personal importance, personal identity, and reality testing. Reality testing lets you know or lets you believe as an organism that you are a separate something in the universe, which is, from an evolutionary psychological place, a good thing to have there so that you propagate a species. Now, the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads are full of passages telling us that this world is not the real one, right? That the self, capital S, is eternal, and what we see is just a play, a dance. It's called the Leela, God's play. Leela means divine play or drama. So to the ancient rishis, this was all a divine dream. It's God's Leela, God's Maya, God's illusion. And that by staying connected to God and in constant contact with God, sought through prayer and meditation, for those of you in AA, that through that constant contact, we don't just find God, but we ultimately find ourselves, because as Krishna, an avatar of God, teaches in the Bhagavad Gita, the wisest among us know God to be their own divine self, and says explicitly in places like chapter 15, verse 7, you are all my parts and parcels, that all living beings are his parts and parcels, that every living thing is inextricably connected to God. So the idea of the Leela and Maya they take on a new meaning. We begin to understand them to also be an extension of God, of Source. So the Leela, which in Sanskrit means divine play, is considered God's Leela. This is all God. This takes us back to the video game analogy, that the gaming platform that the video game is being played on, like PS2, Xbox, whatever, the thing creating the illusion on the screen is God or Source. And you could go even further with this analogy and say that the role of the internet connection in playing the video game, that is God, and that the platform is just another aspect of the soul or Atman. Now, in Buddhism, we get an even sharper edge. Buddha didn't talk about God dreaming us or anything like that, but he did say that what we think of as the self, small s, is a mental fabrication, a process, that it's a collection of sensations, of thoughts and perceptions that are constantly arising and passing, and the way in which us as an awareness experiences the continuity of those thoughts, perceptions, and sensations. And let's not forget memories. That is essentially what we think of as a person or as an identity or as us, as the self. And I'd like to add here a story that the last time I consumed THC, I had too much of it. It was a bit of a thing. And the interesting thing about THC is that you remember everything, or at least I do, as opposed to like when you've gotten too drunk, you don't remember shit. But I do remember having a 170 heart rate that I don't even get that when I run. But there was this, and I very clearly remember, because I said it to several people, embarrassingly, that time was collapsing. And I was trying to hold it together. And what was interesting is it was sad to me that time was collapsing, that there was no time. And I'd had this sensation in the past when consuming THC orally that all there was were these present moments, which isn't bad. But what I realized the last time I had it was that I like time, that I like memory, that I love the past. Because, you know, when you think of love, because I was laying in bed with Christy, we're, I think, fairly new in our relationship. And, you know, as time was kind of disappearing and I was having that time, the past is why you love and how you love and it's and the memories and the things that you share and that it's all so important, right? Even like this sounds ridiculous, but at one point she asked me to go get her water downstairs and I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find my way back to the upstairs. Those of you, a lot of people have had this experience, so you're all probably laughing at this, go, yeah, been there. But that let me know how important places were and that the past, and you know, so often we go through this spiritual trip and like, I'm just in the present. And the present is great. And a lot of times it's a useful tool, right? But the past and memories are beautiful and wonderful, and I like them. And that's what I took out of that experience. But, you know, back to Buddhism, just like in, you know, Hinduism. And remember, Buddha was a Hindu, right? Siddhartha Gautama was a Hindu. That the concept of Maya, or the idea of this being an illusion, is central, right? The teaching is that everything we experience is like a projection of the mind, right? That the world is being projected from the mind onto like a movie screen. Literally, that our consciousness creates a virtual experience and we mistake it for an objective, right? Objective world. Remember our definitions of objective and our definition of illusion, right? Well, now you see. Anything that is or is likely to be wrongly perceived by the senses. So now within Buddhism, we're really getting into simulation territory, right? And that's what's, you know, so funny. You know, as someone who's a card-carrying member of the club, right? I've got the funny name and the whole nine. When someone says, this is a simulation, you just think, yeah, no shit. Now what? Because it's never comes up as like, oh, good, it's a simulation. It's like, it's a fucking simulation. Okay. I mean, you're still hard to deal with and bad at relationships. I suggest you work on those things. Because that was what's interesting within Buddhism, right? That the joke I always make that like, Buddha didn't talk about God because it doesn't matter until you can get over your attachment to Jordans. That's just me being a goofball. Now, let's take a brief look at some indigenous worldviews, but only where the idea is genuinely present. I'm not that interested in it. A lot of people get off on this stuff. I'm like, okay, whatever. Anyway, but in a lot of these Native American traditions, especially, this is because I love the Southwest, so I like to hear this. The tribes in the Southwest, like Hopi and Zuni, there's this idea that we live in a world that's part of a cycle, right? The Hopi talked about this being the fourth world, right? Previous worlds were destroyed, and getting some Graham Hancock stuff. And each one is like a different layer of reality. They also talk about like waking up to your purpose in this dream of the creator. Similarly, in some Australian Aboriginal cultures, there's the concept of the dream time. We've all heard about it. If you watched Ancient Aliens, you've heard of it. It's a sacred era when ancestral beings shaped the world. And even though that time is quote unquote past, it's also now. Dream time isn't separate from reality. It is reality, just not the way we normally see it. And there we get into like some time stuff, like what is past. So yeah, the idea that the world is some kind of a divine projection shows up again and again and again. All right. I didn't mean to just be shitty about Indigenous. I don't know. I'm never that interested in it. I don't know why. I've been to a lot of museums, and like I read Empire of the Summer Moon, which was really cool. Didn't really get into any of that. It was more about how savage the Comanche were. It's a good book. Anyway, let's fast forward to the 20th century where we're at now. Science steps in, and suddenly we've got these tech guys and quantum physicists basically saying the same thing that the sages and the rishis said thousands of years ago. And now everyone takes it fucking seriously because this fucking dork figured it out on a calculator. I guess it's easier just listen to one of these jackwagons talk than it is to read the Vishnu Purana, but I think you should give it a shot. Anyway, you've probably heard even fucking that human robot Elon Musk say he believes that there's 1 in billions a chance that we're not living in a simulation, which is really annoying way of saying that we probably are, right? If technology kind of keeps evolving, right, especially the way it is, eventually we'll be able to simulate realities that are completely indistinguishable from the quote unquote real ones. So if it's possible, and if beings do it often enough, like, I don't know, I guess the odds are that we're in one, right? If beings evolve this. See, this shit is so fucking boring to me. Look, guys, listen. The Vishnu Purana is dense and it's a lot. No, it's not. Fuck, it's not. It's not that much. Just read it. Get one. I think Penguin. You should order it on Amazon. Start reading it. It's very interesting. And if you have questions about it, DM me, email me. We can talk about it, or just come to one of a fucking free meditation group on Sundays, 8 p.m. Eastern, and talk about it. It's so beautiful. And then people like Musk and these dorks just dry it out. It's like, ugh. Anyway. Then there's this guy, Nick Bostrom. Anyway, he's a philosopher from Oxford, so we know we can trust him. Who formalized this idea, this thing that we now call the simulation argument, right? Because we needed him, right? We needed Nick. Right? We didn't need the Vishnu Purana. We needed Nick from Oxford. Anyway, he says either civilizations never reach the point of creating simulated universes, or they do, and the number of simulated beings would vastly outnumber. See, it's the idea that they say the real ones, right? We're back to the word real. If you want, mark it. This is at like 28 minutes into it. Go back to the beginning. Go back to when I was talking about like the definitions of all these things. This just means that you're probably living in a simulation. There was a great show on Hulu called Devs, Devs. I highly recommend you find it. It was so good. But it's about quantum computing and simulation theory. And dude, it's good. It's not stupid. It's better than listening to these jackasses talk about it. It was a cool show. But at one point, this girl looks at the the fucking mad scientist, if you want to call him that, and goes, but it's just a simulation. And he goes, who cares? Or so what? Or whatever. That's what I'm saying. Okay, great. Anyway, so not just this guy, Nick from Oxford, because we all need a Nick from Oxford, but there's another fella, Dr. James Gates. He's a theoretical physicist, so we automatically trust him, but he found what he called, love this shit, error correcting codes embedded in the equations describing fundamental particles. Anyway, he said it's like discovering computer code, specifically something like browser code in the math that makes up the universe. That means nothing to anyone that's listening to this right now. If you read the Vishnu Purana, it makes more sense than this stuff, right? Anyway, browser codes and math of the universe, because, you know, Jim and Nick. I can't. It's like these things, these ideas become so beautiful and they're so like enriching, right? Because the point of this simulation thing is that, like, look, it's subjective. All of this reality is a subjective thing, and that's good news. I'm not interested in proving anything to you, but I want you to understand that this is a subjective experience and that you can change it, right? Like, personally, I don't need these acolytes of the Church of Science and Tech to tell me any of this. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because even me as an American, I'm like, see, he's got doctor in front of his name. This other dipshit went to Oxford, so clearly I'm right. And Buddha was correct, and you're all wasting your time. I'm not wasting my time. So, anyway, in defiance of them, let's shift into more woo-woo territory. So fuck you, Nick, and fuck you, Jim. Because this idea has, the simulation stuff has infected the new age and paranormal landscapes. I love it. Anyway, all right, so these folks, here we go. This guy. You got people like David Icke, right? Dolores Cannon, Tom Campbell, who, incidentally, a NASA physicist turned mystic. That's how you know mysticism is real, because he's a NASA physicist, right? And he said flat out that we're living in a simulation or a learning module of some sort, you know? And you're a plumber, and he worked at NASA, so that's how you know. By the way, NASA stands for Never a Straight Answer. Anyway, Tom Campbell calls it a multiplayer learning lab, right? He says that consciousness is the computer and the reality is a simulation. You know, you got hours of this guy on YouTube talking about this shit. And then Dolores Cannon. I hope you, not Dolores, but this person I know who loves Dolores, I hope you're listening to this episode and you know that I'm smiling right now, okay? Dolores, through honestly questionable past life regression sessions, said that souls choose to enter this illusion to learn. We've all heard this idea that Earth is like a kind of dense, tough school for spiritual growth. And for the record, I tend to reject everything she says. I don't exactly trust her methods, we'll say, but hey, we're here. Fucking bring in Dolores. Let's include Dolores. She's a handful. I love her. You've seen her if you've been down certain rabbit holes. She just looks like somebody's grandma. And I swear to God, if my aunt or my grandmother started talking like Dolores, baby, I'm in. And then we've got David Icke. I hope you know who David Icke is. If you don't know who David Icke is, then you don't feel the fucking humor and excitement that I feel anytime David Icke comes up. And you need, pause this, turn it off, go watch, just type David Icke into YouTube. Fucking, I'll see you in 4 hours. But he's another, well, if you don't know, I don't know. He's entertaining, that's for sure. But he would say it's all much more nefarious more like a hijacked dream controlled by reptilians. Why? Why would he say that? Why would David Icke, shit, I didn't mean to say it. Anyway, why would David Icke say that, right? Because that's what his books are about. And if you want to sell books, if it bleeds, it leads, if it crawls, right? But, on that note, if you're looking for a guidebook to understand your human birth and how to transform your experience of this human birth, my new book, Awake, is available on Amazon. There's a link in the description of this podcast. It's everything I've learned in 29 years of this journey up the mountain. And more importantly, kids, how to implement it in an easy way without going to Nepal and shitting in a hole in the ground or reading ancient grimoires. I've done all that for you except go to Nepal. I've read all the weird shit. This is what I know from working with people for a long time. Now, anyway, whether you buy David Icke's explanation or not, the pattern stays the same, at least, right? This is not what it seems. In my own experience, whether it was through, say, altered states, meditation, whatever, I've absolutely had moments that felt more real than what we call real life, where I stepped outside of what felt like a very elaborate set, almost like, the Truman Show that's being controlled by my own consciousness. Anyway, let's pull it back a bit. Let's stop asking, is it real? And let's start asking the real question, does it fucking matter? If someone handed you undeniable proof, like God unzipped the fucking sky and hands you a hard drive, would you live differently? And if you would, why? But, would you, if you found out that this was all a simulation, that every Vedantic text, every Veda, every whatever was real, would you love more? Would you be less afraid? Would you take your thoughts more seriously or take yourself maybe less seriously? I think about it like this. If I'm dreaming all of this, right? Or if God is dreaming me, then everything that happens here is a message. It's not meaningless. It's a mirror, right? Whether it's a dream or a simulation or some fucking hologram, it's still a training ground if you want it to be, right? You're here to remember who you are. You're here to respond, not react. You're here to wake the fuck up. So what's the takeaway from all of this wacky simulation stuff? I don't think we need to know for sure if we're living in a simulation. I think the wisdom comes from acting as if it's sacred no matter what. Whether it's Maya or a quantum code or the dream of God, what if you lived today as if you were here on purpose? Not a random character, not a victim of code, but a conscious spark. Because even in a dream, you can wake up. And when you do, you realize that the dream isn't the problem. It's forgetting that you're dreaming that's the problem. And remember, whether it's a dream, a simulation, or some divine trick, you are still the dreamer. And you're still here. You reminded me. Now I'm reminding you. I love you. Thank you. If the infinite spark of being has brought you any value, consider supporting the work. And you can do that by checking out Awake and the 90-Day Transformation Journal, both now available on Amazon. The links are in the description. If you want to support this work on a monthly basis, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers that have no locked content yet, just support. You can also swing by the website, check out the merch store, learn more about working with me one-on-one, and as always, the YouTube page has full episodes as well as binaural beats to help you with your practice. So I'll see you next week. Thank you.